podcast, what has now become my own form of self-therapizing, what Orson Welles warned against in his famous admonishment of Woody Allen. Maybe I'll just pull that quote up because it's an interesting quote, one I like to think about and see if I agree with it. I come back to it over and over again because the way he describes Woody Allen, the hatred that he has for Woody Allen, is pretty legendary. The quote, of course, is, "He is arrogant. Like all people with timid personalities, his arrogance is unlimited. Anybody who speaks quietly and shrivels up in company is unbelievably arrogant. He acts shy, but he's not. He's scared. He hates himself. And he loves himself. A very tense situation. It's people like me who have to carry on and pretend to be modest. To me, it's the most embarrassing thing in the world. A man who presents himself at his worst to get laughs, in order to free himself from his hang-ups. Everything he does on screen is therapeutic." I think it's that last line, especially the use of your own media as some form of self-benediction, as some form of therapizing, predominantly selfishly. You can't get out of yourself and experience, the true extroversion of art. It has to become about going toward your ego and making you a better figure in the eyes of people. It's not about sharing something with others. It's about making sure that you are being cared for. But that's what I'm doing. Because how could I not? I'm not like Orson Welles. Unfortunately, I'm more like Woody Allen. Not in the terrible sense, not in the not in the molesting sense. But, am I boisterous and bold, magnanimous? Do I have all those Orson Welles-like qualities? Or am I a shrinking little violet? Am I a shrinking, neurotic little Jewish violet? Like Woody Allen? It's probably the latter, unfortunately, which is why I use my various creative outlets for self-therapizing. I need that. However Orson Welles got out his emotional demons, he probably did it in a much more wholesome way. Probably not. He had some problems that it didn't deal with. I mean, I also find this quote very interesting because, how do you do art that isn't a form of therapy for yourself? And, I think just there is a soothing quality to the craft of it. Forget about the subject matter. Just doing it, just entering the process of it is what gives me pause, is what gives me the ability to continue doing it and to want to work hard at it, because there is a pleasurable and self-exploratory quality that is inherent to the creation of art. And, I think that he just, Orson Welles is just saying anything. He just hates Woody Allen because he's, gross. He's awful and sort of nervous and annoying, and, he comes up with all these adjectives to describe what we all know about Woody Allen. He's an annoying little creep. He could have summed it up in those three words, but he didn't, because he's Orson Welles and he's the coolest man to have ever lived, and so he says a lot of very cool stuff, which I think are of varying degrees of accuracy about Woody Allen. But yeah, that timidity too, the shrinking in company thing, that's something I do a lot. I think he is right about that, though. I think it is sort of a selfish action to shrink into your own introversion. Not that you should be forced to go out and be social with others, but it's like, that's the point of maturing, is slowly getting the idea in your head that it's not about you anymore. And Lord knows I don't have that idea in my head. I'm still very selfish. I'm still about self-adulation. I'm still about trying to make my ego the primary thing, which I think, is a struggle for a lot of artists, who become monomaniacal and are sort of very self-driven, and, how do you get out of that? But I guess, why I allude to the comics as therapy bit why I allude to the art as therapy is because I wanted to say comics have largely been therapy for me. Earlier this week, I saw a hashtag or something that was trending on Twitter that was comics broke me. And it was really sad to see because it's more like, less that comics are like emotionally damning and more that the industry is in a terrible place and it's harder than ever to make a living off of this specific thing. And that in order to get ahead, you really need some sort of money or financial backing if you want to do anything as time-consuming and as cost-consuming as a graphic novel or something like that. Long past are the days when you can be like a relatively small person and get picked up by a publisher. You know, the market is too oversaturated because it is... the opportunity cost for being a comic artist in some respects has gone way down. Like you don't necessarily have to go to any sort of art school or anything like that. You don't have to go to some sort of industrial school. You can like pirate software very easily and, you know, get it on a relatively cheap tablet and, you know, you can get a pro career going for like $300, $500 maybe. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. I have no idea what the numbers are on that, but the opportunity cost is lower, but the competition and the lack of opportunity to be marketed and to find employment is, as a result, much more elusive. So that's why a lot of people are just striking out on their own. They've decided, you know, they can't rely on institutions and go, like me, they do the Patreon route and supplement their art by also doing the thing that you also have to do nowadays, which is be some sort of media personality as well, which Lord knows I'm doing right now by talking to you. So that's comics broke me is that's a real phenomenon. It's like you found this thing that you really love doing and you're good at, better at than most other people, and it provides you with some sense of fulfillment. And you look to the past, you look to like a generation of boomers where, although, you know, it's always hard to make it as an artist, but there was a real path for working class people back then. You know, you read the biographies of people like Harvey Kurtzman for Mad Magazine or like Joe Orlando or somebody, and it's like it always starts the same way. It's like, this guy grew up in a one-room tenement in the Bronx, sharing his house with, you know, his 5 siblings, and, you know, like it's crazy how like a lot of those early Mad guys just came from total poverty, but there was systems in place to allow you cheap art education. A lot of those guys went to industrial schools. They obviously had talent from early ages, but, you know, there were relatively cheap ways to get an education back then, and then to be enrolled in sort of this more systematized world that had a much greater need for illustration because photography was still fairly expensive, and, you know, I think it was viewed with a lot more sanctity. There was a sort of greater public understanding that it is good to employ artisans, but maybe I'm wrong about that as well. But at any rate, yeah, there were more systemic career opportunities for people that didn't come from a lot of money. You could start out poor and end up making a living as an artist, I would say, much more easily in sort of that golden age when there was like that brief post-war sort of coming together in America where they actually had some form of centralization and the marginal tax rate was really high. And, you know, there was, because of this, you know, horrible just a series of generational bloodlettings that had just happened, there was a renewed sense of taking care of the populace to some degree, which is why you had, you know, tons of cheap housing and everything. And of course, you know, America was like the manufacturing powerhouse of the world at that point because they were the only one left. So they had all this money to go to social programs as well. And, you know, part of that was following the legacy of Roosevelt's WPA and stuff like that. But Yeah, I think there was an idea that you could be an industrial artist, that there was, a form of art that was a professional sort of 9 to 5 employment type of thing, not stuff that was necessarily like highfalutin and meant for galleries, but like a real working class thing. You come in, you draw your pictures, and then you get out at the end of the day, sort of like, and you could make a living off of that. You could get a house on Long Island off of that stuff. And long gone are those days, like those opportunities dried up a long time ago. There is way less public support for the arts proportionally than there was in years past. And, just also a market that has too many people in it as well. So it is tough to break through. And, of course, the ever-tightening grip of companies that are bought out by VC and, our ever-increasing demand for free entertainment as well as consumers, and our expectation that entertainment be free as well, I think sometimes contributes to that. We look at the music industry. The bottom fell out of that. It's still very possible to make stuff, but you see like bands like Stars or other bands like that saying that every time we go on tour it's a money loser, because the bottom fell out of this market, because it used to be you made your money on album sales, or in movies you used to make your money on DVD sales, or with art you used to buy more physical copies of comic books. But I think because of stuff like downloading platforms, because of stuff like Napster, Metallica, obviously took it too far, but I did think it instilled a generation of people with a cultural expectation that art is free. More than anything else, it is something that should be free, or at least very cheap, which is also why the cultural expectation to pay artists, I think, is lower than it might have been in years past. And, all of this contributes to talk about getting an education now. You go to fucking SVA, or you go to Pratt or something, that costs like $30K, but probably way more a year, plus the living expenses in New York. And, you're not going to recoup that shit ever. So, that's why it's a really fucked up world if you want to try to make a living as a comics artist. Usually you'll have an extra job. It is the passion that sustains you, and you're willing to work for less if you're willing to do this thing more, because your passion is exploitable, which is a very sad situation. Which is also, I think, part of it is like you see all these young artist types, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. You have these ideas that people want to share in the expression or creation, and then you come to the reality of being part of an art market, and that joy slowly gets wrung out of you as you have to contend with the realities of an employment class that is not willing to pay you for what you're worth. So, yeah, I understand that aspect of comics broke me. Like, that's real. There's nothing I can do about it. And, if I speak against it, I'd be hypocritical, obviously, because I have family money that I've been subsisting on in order to fund my stuff for a little bit now. And, before I was on unemployment, but now I have a support network. I have money that I can rely on that means that I don't have to get a day job for a little bit. I'm probably going to have to get one very soon. But I've been very lucky in that respect, which is why I can say that comics haven't broke me yet. Or because I also have been, flirting with... It's also been, like, semi-serious, too. I have this great... It's hard to think of myself as a cartoonist or a comics artist rather than just a person, just some guy who does comics, who draws comics occasionally. But to identify myself as a cartoonist or a comics artist seems very weird, as much as it is to identify yourself as doing any job. It's one of the first things people ask, what do you do? What's your occupation? And you say, this, and this is what defines me, because this is what I do for most of my life. And I guess it's true to some degree, but you don't want it to be true. You don't want to be just one thing. You don't want to say, I am a cartoonist or I am a comics artist, because you want to contain multitudes. But you probably don't. We're usually only good at a very limited amount of things, if any. And I'm not particularly good at comics either. I know what level I'm operating on. But, there is some sort of idiosyncrasy to my work, which I think drives its recognition. I don't know. Who the fuck cares? I don't know. But I also wanted to talk about the corollary to Comics Broke Me, which has little to do with the financial reality of making it as a comics artist, as a full-time comics artist, or as a full-time illustrator even. It's more to do with just your spiritual orientation in the world and how to live your life in a way that complies with your understanding of yourself, but understanding of your place in the world around you. It was interesting. Cormac McCarthy, of course, died recently, and everyone was sharing their stories about Cormac McCarthy. And what I find inspiring about him is he would, rather choose to live in poverty in order to continue and to write, to hone his craft, rather than accept a speaking gig at the university down the road for $2,000. He would say, "No, it's all out on the page there. I'll be fine living in my dilapidated barn eating beans. My wife is very angry at me, but that's okay. I'll get divorced a bunch, possibly because of this unwavering commitment to my art." I don't know. I can't. But yeah, that was one story, is he would get offered money to do stuff and he'd be like, "No, it's all just a writer. I'm a writer. It's all there on the page. Leave me alone. I'm going to eat beans instead of trying to accumulate material wealth by conventional means." And so I found this to be inspiring in some ways. Obviously, I don't want to live in a dilapidated barn eating beans, alienating myself from my significant other for the course of my art. That also sounds kind of bad, but I think what inspired me about that is that this is someone that found the thing that he should be doing, the thing that he could uniquely offer the world. Which, if you find that thing in your life, you are so fucking lucky if you are able to find that thing in your life. And I think if you find that thing in your life very early and you do it for a while and you get burnt out on it, that really fucking sucks. But I'm also in the lucky situation that I didn't really find that thing. Not comparing myself to Cormac. Obviously, he's one of the best fucking writers ever. I'm not saying I have any, I come close to any part of his literary canon with my penis comics. But there is something I had to offer the world which was, better than my skills as an office worker, better than my skills as, a potential lawyer, Those things I was mediocre to bad at. But I found something that I was actually kind of good at. And, a lot of us live through life in this perpetual agonization about our mediocrity. I hate to bring it up again, but I always do now. I guess I do it every podcast now because it's was an interesting experience. But I think that's why people were very mad at You Are Not Special, because you always have this inkling of, well, I'm not that great. Nothing I do is of note. People don't comment on it or interact with it in any sort of significant way. I'm not a thought leader. People aren't concerned about what I have to say. Most of your life, you live like that. Even when you get a bunch of followers on social media like I do, you're still under that apprehension of unless you're very megalomaniacal, but it's ultimately I'm just entertainment for someone. Nobody really has any sort of investment in what I have to say, because I'm also like not a pundit, and I don't hold myself out to be any sort of pundit or commentator. I just talk about what interests me, and maybe some people like it. Who knows? Either way, so yeah, that thing, finding that thing about you, or that thing that you enjoy doing and that you can commit to doing. I am a true believer that if you can find something in your life that you're willing to work at and get better at, and like, I know it's like a very Germanic or Protestant-ish sort of view, but I think it's even into communism, there is like a dignity in work. I think we have to do, not just any work, it has to be work that has a fulfillment or a meaning or a purpose to you personally, or is building something that you believe in. But I think, if you've ever experienced a life or an extended period of life where you only pursue leisure, as I have, as many of us do in our mid-20s, where we just have a phase where we have like a shitty job and our lives are dedicated to any time after that job where we're getting as drunk or on drugs as humanly possible. And, you go through that sort of period of pursuing leisure and, trying to be like the dude in The Big Lebowski and trying to not work at any cost and, trying to, play life in the sort of like on easy mode in some sort of way. Just lean back. And, some people can do that. There's nothing wrong with that lifestyle. But I find that was not emotionally fulfilling for me, or it led to a strong existential belief that, I was nothing and I wasn't doing anything. And that's, that can be one of the most damning things of all, to believe I'm not doing anything, I'm not accomplishing anything, Whether it's not about having a legacy to hold on to after you die, but, just creating anything that exceeds yourself, that something came from me that will go beyond my flesh, whether you're like a garbage man that takes pride in their job. I'm sure there's, most garbage men aren't like super into being garbage men. I don't know that, actually. It seems like a tough job, but they have a good pension. They tend to pay well. But I'm sure there is like, I often fetishize the idea of like a blue collar job. I think about, wouldn't it be romantic if I were a garbage man? Wouldn't it be romantic if I were a plumber? Then I, when I quit my job, my most recent job because of a mental breakdown, I thought maybe I'll go to school to be a plumber. Maybe because, I was thinking of Philip Glass was a plumber for years and years until his music hit it big. He was like a plumber into his mid-40s before he started seeing any dividends from his artwork. So I thought, I could do that. But, I'm not that type of person. I can only commit myself to this one thing, because doing anything else feels like an indignity. Or it feels like you only have a limited amount of time on Earth. You have a preciously short amount of time on Earth. A really limited amount. I cannot stress to you how short life is. Or it seems that way. Especially as you get older and time starts moving faster. So when you think about yourself doing a job that you don't really have a strong personal investment in, that you don't have really a desire to get better at because you have no aptitude for it, or it's inherently uninteresting, or you feel a disconnect to the goal of your organization, however noble it may be, if you're stuck in one of these roles, you freak out. You have an existential nightmare. I think, most of us are usually in a situation where we're in these jobs where they're just not right for our personality. but we continue anyway because we need the money, and it's the only thing we know how to do. But going into these day in, day out, I think is like, you can tolerate it at first, but if you don't find a job you really enjoy doing or have like an investment in or feel like you enjoy the craft of it, like I think like the reason why I'm attracted to those blue collar jobs like a plumber or like I don't know, or construction, is because you can see the craft, you can get better at something, and you do it every day, and you develop this skill that's real and produces something in reality that is functional. And whereas with like when you're at an emails job, getting better at doing your little emails is this very abstract exercise, and you do so many of them, and every day is such a slog. You don't even know if you're actually improving or not. If you're like me and you were not particularly good at your emails job. So I think that is, that's just a really important factor in life. You gotta enjoy, if you're stuck in capitalism, even if you're not in capitalism, even if we're at the commune and we're in the like post-capitalist utopian society, and we can generate everything from the replicator, and we are completely set for resources, do you think are you going to become the Wall-E people in that situation? Do you want to become the placated, big gulp drinking, boneless person, or do you want to be like Star Trek? Do you want to use this newfound freedom to educate yourself and to explore and to devote yourself to some higher notion of humanity? I'd like to think it's the latter. I'd probably end up just being the former. I wouldn't, if I'm in the Star Trek universe, I'm not in Starfleet, I am in a personal holodeck. I have my neat bucks from the communist utopian society. I'm eating. I'm using my replicator to replicate Slim Jims. It's a good time. A good time is had by all. A good time is had by all. But yeah, it's like once your needs are met, what do you want to do? Or even once your needs are not met, what do you want to do? Like on the commune, what do you want to do? Do you really just want to be the bard, or do you want to contribute to something? I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think, my basic point overall that I've been leading to is that working at something that you're kind of good at, you have sort of an aptitude for, doesn't feel that bad. If you find that thing, latch on to it like grim death, because that is hard to come by in this world. Something that you feel the desire to get better at. I think that's why it's heartening to see people, doing speed running or, doing games like video game championships where they don't necessarily have a hope of making a living off of it, because that is the thing that fulfills them. But I think some people are able to deal with their jobs they hate, in a way that it was not as existentially damning as my experience with it. I think most people are able to do that. If most people weren't able to do that, nothing would get done in this goddamn society. I think that's also the question you have as an artist, why do I get to be an artist? Do I have something to say or something to express that is so wholly unique that it deserves to be my career? Am I really giving something back to people? Or is it just some form of transient entertainment that is really valueless in every sense of that word? And I think that's something, you struggle a lot with as an artist, reconciling that idea that you aren't really contributing anything. I talked about this with Branson Reese on the episode where I interviewed Branson Reese, but on the post-apocalyptic commune, we're both dead. We're not. It's cartoons or nothing. I only exist in this this capitalist society, this decadent capitalist society that allows multiple people to make decent livings off of goddamn cartoons. Why should why should you be able to make a living? Why should you be able to make a decent living off of cartoons? Isn't it turning the clock back? Aren't we dumbing each other down with this constant claptrap, this nonsense? Especially the stuff I do, But no, it is important. And ultimately, you realize it's important if you're like me and or like maybe Cormac McCarthy, you realize it's the only thing you can do. You've tried everything else, and this is it. This is the one thing that doesn't make you feel like killing yourself if you do it 10 hours a day. Or so it's maybe not the one thing that doesn't make you feel yourself, but one of a small handful of things that doesn't make you feel like killing yourself if you do it for extended periods and if it dominates a large portion of your life, And I think you're unlucky in some ways if you discover this thing when you're too young. As I said before, sometimes when you figure this out really early, what my thing is, you devote everything to it, and either, that means you work really hard and, because you found it when you were so young, you get a leg up on other people who maybe started later in their lives. But a lot of the time, and I think a lot of what I saw in the Comics Broke Me tweet are a lot of people that figured out that comics was their thing. Comics brought them a certain level of self-worth and dignity, and they felt that they tried to make a living off of it, and they got burned out after doing it. Even though, you can see examples of lots of people that use that hashtag who are obviously brilliantly talented. But, the market, it's oversaturated. It's who you know. It's inherently nepotistic. There's a lot of unfairness to it, and you're just constantly having to deal with that while still wanting to develop your craft and maybe create something that exceeds you as a person. And I wanted to say that's really how comics saved me. I had shunned the idea of being an artist because my dad was a muralist for a lot of his life, and he did not make a ton of money. And this was a huge point of contention in my parents' marriage. Because, raising a kid, paying down a mortgage, it's difficult for... it's difficult on a double income, but if you're not making that much, and if you also have like a series of hobbies that are also very expensive, sometimes that can create tension within your situation. So I think that's sort of what averted me from admitting to myself that I had this aptitude or this inherent inclination towards art as something that I would practice for a lot of my life, because I saw how difficult it was to make it work. My dad was very talented, and he worked extremely hard, and he still had trouble just making a decent living, even in an art world that was slightly less hostile. It was still hostile. It's always been difficult to make it as an artist, but it definitely was less hostile in the past. Just on cost of living alone, too. You can, Larry David lived in subsidized apartments. If you went to the Lower East Side in 1975, you're like, oh, here's a room for $75, and then that's it. That's your room. You don't have to work a full-time job. You can devote yourself to developing your craft. So, yeah, I think just seeing a personal struggle of somebody that did really try, and through just an inability to understand the marketing part of it, an inability to really understand the business part of it, he just couldn't get around it. And because I knew that I didn't really have that entrepreneurial spirit or business mind to fulfill that element of artwork, I didn't think I wanted to pursue it. Additionally, I went to a fancy private school, which was very strange because I had a scholarship there. It's weird being middle class but being the poorest kid at your very wealthy private school. Maybe not the poorest kid, but among the poor children of my school, which is not very poor at all. I still lived very comfortably. I always thought I was poor because the kids' houses I was going to, they all had like swimming pools and like tennis courts and stuff, and I was like, wow, I don't have anything at all. Then I gained a sense of proportion later in life. But yeah, I think also being around this wealth and being around all these people that eventually aspired and went on to develop these professional careers, I thought that's what it had to be, right? I've been given this education. I've been given this access to this professional world. I have some sort of academic competence. I guess I will try and be a lawyer. I'll try and be something, good and respectable. And all this time, I was like a music major in college, but with the sort of implied knowledge that I was going to law school after. There would be some sort of professional grad school situation. I pursued the law degree under that apprehension, and I was just fucking miserable. I've said this before on previous solo podcasts where I've talked about my life, but you can listen to the depressive episode if you want to hear more about that. But yeah, it just was not right for me. So not right for me that I was just more depressed than I had ever had been because I had got myself into thinking that this is it. This is the only way. You've seen how hard it is for artists out there. What you're feeling right now, this existential gut-wrenching dread about you committing yourself to 1/3 of your life spent in discomfort. Fuck that. That's how most people live. You should get along, and it's certainly better. It's certainly a better option than being a goddamn fucking artist, right? Than living that life and having to push yourself and having to constantly search for opportunities and scrounge for everything. And because I didn't want to do that, because I didn't want to live with that uncertainty, I kept plugging along until, it all came crashing down. I had a couple of mental breakdowns. And I quit my job. I had quit a very good job. It wasn't like a law job, but I had gotten a very decent office job with great benefits. It was something that wasn't evil. It was a good place to work at. I had that going. I believed in the mission of the work. And it was office work, though. It was emails job. It was drafting letters. It was, doing phone calls, being contrite and polite on the fucking phone. And it was a nightmare. A goddamn nightmare. It shouldn't be. That should be a job that, a normal person should be able to do without much complaint. And, I'm sure people of any capacity could probably do that. But for me, it was just, every day this dread of coming in and having to do this thing that I was profoundly uninterested in and that I couldn't get better at because it was so inherently stultifying. So I quit my job, and for 4 months I just didn't do anything. I was on unemployment, we have fairly decent unemployment in Canada. So I was able to coast for a bit on there. But I was just doing nothing. I was so depressed. I was just only sleeping, only watching TV, not doing anything a day. If I showered that day, that was a good day. And I had been doing comics while I was working at the job. I was doing my series of unfunny and severe political cartoons while I was at my last year at that job. So I had an inkling that I wanted to do comics. That still wasn't the thing yet. I still didn't understand that. I had the shape of what I wanted to do, but the type of thing that I was doing was something that I felt obligated to do just because there had been this big explosion in left media, and, almost sort of half nobly, because I was like, these are good ideas and I want to spread them, but half cynically is like, oh, there's a big explosion in left media. Maybe I can get on this gravy train. Maybe I can get on this Chapo train. Very, very, clout chasing psychopath idea, to some degree, which I think is why they didn't take, because they weren't really honest to what I thought was funny or what I wanted to express or put out in the universe. And then so I quit those comics. I stopped doing them. I quit my job around the same time because of the stress I was experiencing at it, and did nothing for 4 months. I felt, like a talentless loser. And then, for whatever reason, I just started doing them again. Actually, I can tell you the reason, and the reason is very silly and sort of weird. But, I'll say it anyway. It's not silly or weird, but it involves a well-known internet figure who, in some ways, I have to thank for, inadvertently launching my interest in comics back again. But also, I sort of want to keep an arm's length from, because I've seen some stuff about him that is like, I don't know about that. But during my political comics run, or during my, leftist, supposedly leftist comic, it's so fucking embarrassing. But I'd made a comic about Vosh, and because he was coming up in the media sphere around the time that I was doing it. And he seemed to be like this strange... He called himself leftist, but sort of more of a centrist, liberal type of guy. So he was easy pickings on sort of the more left, or like Marxist Lenin-y Twitter, people that had, more communist bona fides than he did. So I made a comic about, this Vosh guy is so off-putting. Who is this for? And then there's a legion of guys that look exactly like Vosh that said, "We are Legion." It was sort of meant to be an insult, I guess. He ended up liking the cartoon a lot, and he reposted it a bunch. And one time, at one of the height of my depression, he reposted the comic, and I started getting a bunch of followers on Twitter because someone had identified that it was me who had done it. And then in my head, I was like, shit, I got a bunch of fucking Vosh kids following me now. I guess I better produce... They're expecting comics now. I guess I better produce something for these goddamn Vosh kids. But it's like, I didn't want to do political material anymore. I was so depressed that, I don't think I could be creative for periods longer than 15 or 30 minutes. So I just started doing these really crude comics about little blob men having sex with each other, which was sort of in my mind at the time, because a big portion of my comics, and maybe something that I want to get into, I know I've been shying away from it recently. I haven't been doing as many gay sex comics, as many penis comics recently. Some of that is just, you write so many penis jokes, there aren't any more left. Now I have to do comics about pop culture, maybe I'll incorporate more dicks into that. But I think part of it, and sort of a running thread in my comics, is this disgust with my own body, this sort of sense of body dysmorphia. Because I'm not I don't work out, I don't exercise. I'm not great looking in the torso department. Just say that much. I'm fine. I know intellectually that I am not unattractive. I know that I'm hitting sort of the middle of the pack there. I'm there's nothing terribly, strange about me or, off-putting. I don't have Gremlinian face. Which, even if you do have Gremlinian face, if you're not Gremlinian, if you have a better personality than Gremlinian, you can exceed that. But, now I'm getting to a hole about attractiveness. But who cares? But the point is, even at like a relatively average level of looks, I think there is this sense that love is only meant for really beautiful people, or for people that, are deserving of it because they are inherently more sexually attractive, or there is something that is, more desirable about them. And a lot of this project has been spending a lot of my time convincing myself that it isn't necessarily about that initial lust or that initial arousal, but rather about a shared and prolonged intimacy that you have with people. Even the people who you fuck for one night, there is something more important than just base attractiveness in doing that. Which is very funny because I also don't fuck. I don't go out. I'm not on Grindr. I don't do anything. I devote myself to these comics instead of doing relationships. But I think, part of it is just this year-long process of coaching myself to not feel like I am so ugly that I am undateable. And I think that comes out in the comics a lot, where it's sort of a bunch of chonky-looking guys. I guess they're sort of thin, but it's sort of abstract, what body type they are. They're sort of blobby. They're generally pretty thick. They don't have thin limbs, and I think that's sort of an interesting thing in my comics. How everyone has pretty thick limbs because I don't know if they're implied to be heavy or anything like that, but I guess it makes it more neutral. They have a more neutral body type, which allows me to think, that's what I look like, basically. I have this sort of neutral body type. I am this sort of blobby figure with thick limbs. I guess that's true. It's like a very common thing for artists to draw characters that end up looking like themselves. A famous Disney animator, Nick Ranieri, no relation to Keith Ranieri. Is the name is spelled differently, but Nick Ranieri, who is like a guy who has a big thin head, and he's sort of lanky. He would often draw characters that were lanky and had thin heads, like Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast, or Jafar, or Hades, and if you're a short, squat guy, you tend to draw guys that are shorter and squat. Like Jack Kirby was this like 5'4" brick shithouse of muscle, so it's no wonder he drew all these wide guys, these guys with wide heads, and But I think that's also part of it, is just because my major reference for the human body is my own body. I guess I'm drawing characters that sort of look like, that vaguely are shaped like how I'm shaped. And I think drawing that over and over again is sort of this affirmation that this body's not so worthless. Also, I just find, as does everyone, and probably influenced a little by Cumtown in this respect, but, just hearing Stav do his bit where he's just singing a song and it's like, sucking a little last dick now, sucking a little last dick, sucking a dick and in my ass, that shit. it was like, it had this, I realized that the dumbest shit is the funniest shit. That's the problem, is like you can make the cleverest joke on earth, you can make the best bon mot, you can make a nice reference to Candide in your witticism, but ultimately it's never going to be funnier than sucking a little last dick now, sucking my yeah, I'm cracking myself up now just thinking about that really stupid premise. Louis C.K., a terrible man, Louis C.K. But in that one Talking Funny special, he has a bit that I sort of reference in the idea that humor is ultimately something that is stupider, is somehow is always the funnier thing. because Louis C.K. talks about he going out on the road and seeing like the worst local comics, but them doing bits that just end up sticking in his head later, like a guy with an acoustic guitar instead of sitting on the dock of the bay. He says, "Sitting on a cock 'cause I'm gay." Louis C.K. will be, in the shower weeks later singing, "Sitting on a cock 'cause I'm gay." It's so fucking stupid, but it makes you laugh. And so I think allowing that lack of pretension as well, once I stopped believing that I was doing anything of importance and that I'm just, there to make something dumb and maybe, maybe a little bright. Maybe not bright in the smart sense, but light, something that doesn't make you feel bad necessarily. Something that, just is there to make you laugh a little. Make you laugh a little, hopefully. And so I think discovering that, the comics plus the sort of gag-oriented nature that I felt comfortable with, that was really big for me, because this felt like something more than ever before, more than, even my other big creative preoccupation, which was music, that I would do that on and off, and I didn't like to practice, and it always felt sort of chore-like in some respects, whereas with this comic stuff, it was way easier and more natural to do it for like hours and hours and hours at a time and commit myself to it. And that's why, in the early days of the stuff, I was doing like 3-4 comics a day, and, I had this process where I would just do inks only, so it was really streamlined. But I had never had that before. I really had never had that before. Something that, inspired me to work on it even during my downtime, something that I would skip downtime in order to keep practicing and to want to get better at. And, I feel lucky to have discovered it, 10 years after the fact, or 10 years after, like, a lot of people discover what their thing is. Usually you sort of figure it out when you're a teenager and then you pursue something there. But I think, having been on the other side and having been in careers or been committed to making money in ways where I was working at jobs that I just couldn't do and I knew I was bad at, and was faced with that indignity constantly of being forced to do something you're bad at. That sounds like a hellish torture to me. And that's how a lot of people are living their lives and doing their jobs. I'm forced to perform in front of people every day and do something that I'm not very, very good at. That's hell. And, it's not as bad as hell, but it's still not so good. And, if you do that for a while, if you do that for 10 years, then once you finally find the thing that you actually can get better at, and you're willing to commit yourself to train and get better at, then it's like an indescribable feeling. It's like a lifeline. It's like you never had that before. You never had that sense of purpose or dignity before, which is, why, even though I'm still not making money off it, I'm committing myself to it a lot, because it feels natural in a way that nothing has ever felt. And in that respect, I owe everything to comics. I owe everything, talk about eradicating that sense of purposelessness, that really existentially damning thing of, there is nothing that defines me. There is nothing that gives my life any sort of idiosyncrasy or essential purpose beyond just being a drone. Maybe you're not concerned with that sort of thing, which I think is ultimately a healthier thing. But I think you're lying if you're not concerned with your ultimate goal or where do you fit in, or, I think that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're always in that negotiation of trying to fit in. Some people do it more easily, but I think we're always that spot where we fit is ever changing and shifting, and it is exhausting to struggle to keep up with the shape of it. And I think it's just once you find something that works for a while, where it's not necessarily exhausting to fit the shape of that little receptor there. It's like fucking crack, It's like I remember, and even before I received, any sort of recognition or notoriety from the comics, from the gay comics, I should say, they were providing me with like an immense amount of peace, way better than, attacking my depression way better than any SSRI had ever attacked it before, because this felt real. There were results to it. However else I failed that day, I was able to do a comic. However else, I fucked up or, didn't pay my bills on time or, didn't shower because I'm like too depressed or anything like that. Here was something that I could do, and at the beginning I could do these in like 15-minute increments, so my depression lethargy didn't even affect it that much. I could really feel that I was developing something, building something. And why comics though? Why not anything else? That's the other question you have is like, oh God, I finally found this thing that lots of people search their entire lives for and never find. This occupation where I have an inherent sense of purpose. And it's cartoons? It couldn't have been something more serious? It couldn't have been, something where people will respect, oh, that guy, he's a real smart lawyer. He knows how to do stuff. He works really hard and he gets really good. No, it's cartoons. That's the thing that I'm going to devote myself to and spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about and practicing. It's cartoons. Because, you start worrying if will I never grow up? Is this part of my juvenile holdover? Is that I'm into these fucking cartoons? But no, I think I sort of have an answer to why cartoons, or why I think comics specifically, the use of sequential art and of text and pictures combined together. Why I think comics are important, or why I think they reflect something to me that other mediums of art aren't capable of capturing, is I think it is the language of memory to me. More than any other art form, I think comics to me capture the unique quality of memory. If films are like how we dream, and films really influence how we dream, obviously. When films were in black and white, people would dream in black and white. But, lots of filmmakers, David Lynch, Steven Spielberg, all of them are like, the movies are our dreams, right? But to me, comics are like how we experience memory. In the same way that I think sort of literature is close to how we experience memory. But the way that we remember things, and especially the way that I remember things, and I don't know if this is a function of me just reading a lot of comics and that affecting my perception, but when I'm trying to specifically recall something in my brain, it looks like a comic. It has this vague assemblage of a picture, a tableau, and words associated with it in my head that sort of flashes. And I think when I try and think of events that happened in the past, or I try to think of what happened last night, it rarely takes the form of a film in my memory, but rather like flashes of pictures with the empty, boring space cut out in between. So I think that's why sort of comics, when you get really into them, have that very nostalgic quality. I say inherent a lot. I don't know why. I like the word. It has good syllables, but there's a nostalgic quality inherent to comics that I think separate it from another medium, because it like almost the way that, you know, Proust would try and evoke memory, try and evoke the sort of specific, detailed tangents of memory in his literature work. You can do with images in a way that is, I feel, closer and more accurate to the way that we experience memory. Because maybe some people experience memory as long strings of text. That would be crazy to me. That sounds terrible. If you're a writer and that's how you experience memory, get at me, message me after the show. Just send us an email at houseofdecline@gmail.com. But yeah, I think that to me is the essential character of comics, which make them irresistible. They really seem like the flashes of reality that we perceive in our internal worlds, more so than a lot of other mediums. And I think that's why, even, you know, at the level that I'm doing them, you know, I think it's important for preserving that idea of, like, comics aren't necessarily depictions of fiction, but rather memories of a universe that didn't exist, you know? And I think even the lowest forms of comics are like that. You know, when I say, yeah, even Control Alt Delete, as H Bomber Guy, you know, said in that video, that has something very intimate to say about the human condition, even unintentionally. Which is why I think, you know, that's the other thing about art too, is that whenever you're practicing it, it always has value anthropologically. I saw the thread on Twitter of people of, like, what's a piece of art that makes you cry? And, you know, a lot of people were posting, you know, some very sad stuff. A lot of the original post was about Keith Haring's painting of his declaration of love for his friends who had died of HIV, and he would be next up too, which is, you know, fucked up. It's weird to understand your death so profoundly and at such a young age. But another one of the things that people said was sad, or that had them crying, or they were posting the pictures of that doodles of a young Slavic boy that they found, which are just very interesting. If you feel this instant sense of connection to the past, and you feel this humanity that sometimes is a little hard to glean when you're thinking about history and you're thinking about the course of human events, because these people can be fictionalized, and in that fictionalization, or in that just translating the lives and the breaths and the physicality of these people into words, you're always going to be dehumanizing them in some way. But seeing the little pictures that this boy drew is like just instant connection, you know, because it looks like what I drew when I was a kid. You know, we've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years, and, you know, you could depict all that. That meant so much with just these few little details, because they situated you somewhere in history, and they allowed you to relate to people across space and time. Those small little doodles, you know? And that's very powerful to me. I think that's why it's always worth it for anyone. You know, even if you're producing bad art or shitty art or jejune art, it's like, it's a product of its time as well, you know, and understanding it as a product and in context of its times is really valuable. Which is also, you know, why cartoons, because especially a daily cartoon, it really situates yourself, you really situate yourself in time. You respond to events that are happening in that year, you know, especially as you get older and life gets shorter and the clock keeps ticking and ticking, and your memory gets worse and worse, and you want to remind yourself of just what you were doing that day, or, you know, what was going on in my mind at that time, and then to have something to refer to. You know, that's that's invaluable. And, it might even live past you. And someone can see the penis, someone in the year 2500 who's doodling a penis comic on their super notebook, they see the penis comic from 500 years ago, and they're like, oh my God, they're just like us. This is situating me in some sort of historical cosmic context, and it's making me emotional right now. And I think that's why cartoons, because however slight they might be, or whatever small amount of entertainment, they're coming from you, and they're diaristic, and they're valuable because they document a human life. And I think if you find something like that, if you find something in your life that not only is able to give you that sense of purpose through craft and through technically training yourself and through the sense of joy you get at getting better at something, as I think all of us do. And not only does it do that, but that thing also represents something that can exceed you and situate you in a temporal context and make it so that your personal struggle or your ego suddenly becomes universal and relatable to everyone. And it's not your ego anymore, then it's everyone's. And I think it connects you to that greater consciousness of humankind. And if you're able to find something like that, and you can find it in a lot of places. You can find it as a plumber. You can find it, doing social work. You can find it, trying to do some sort of business or trying to organize something together. You find it in a lot of ways. But if you are lucky enough to find it, as I have, in comics, then you're doing pretty good. And that's what I wanted to say. Comics saved me. And besides the financial considerations, which are obviously, very grim, if you're in a situation like I was, and you feel like you've devoted a large portion of your life to something that is ultimately inconsequential, then maybe they can save you too, if you give them a chance.